We don't use merger because it wasn't a merger. It was the creation of a brand new union with a new constitution, with a new structure, with a new focus. And
so it wasn't the joining together of two organizations. It was the creation of something completely new.
Yes.
And was it completely new?
Yes, because the world needed something new. Workers needed something bold and different. And because we were bringing two cultures together, that meant, particularly in the early days of the union, I saw my role as the regional director in the Atlantic at that time, and I did that for 6 years. It was really about getting in there, hands-on, working with our locals, assisting where I could on bargaining things, but it was about building the union. And you don't do that if you're not out there with members and you're not out there with locals and finding opportunities to bring people together so they know each other.
Welcome to Activists Make History. My name is Peggy Nash. I've been a union activist, a feminist advocate, and for nearly a decade, a member of Parliament in Canada's House of Commons. I know what it's like to start from scratch, against the odds, in building a community campaign or running for political office. Our lives are hugely affected by political decisions, but for the underrepresented in political life, Canadian politics can seem like a secret society designed to shut them out. I'm here with a special series from Perspectives, a Canadian journal of political economy and social democracy, to lift the curtain on these electoral mysteries and show the underdogs how we can do it. This episode could not have been made possible without the generous support of Unifor, Canada's largest private sector union. In Activists Make History, I talk to activists, experts, political leaders, and those like me who've been there and done that, to show you can make real progressive change in how Canadian democracy functions so that we can win a better world through elected office. Our guest today is Lana Payne, the president of Unifor, the largest private sector union in Canada. Lana's activism was forged in the 1980s in the collapse of the fishing industry. She later went on to lead the Newfoundland and Labrador Federation of Labour, became area director for the union, and now is the national president of Unifor since 2022. Welcome to Activists Make History.
Great to be here with you, Peggy.
Now, you and I come from the same union, and we have crossed paths many times over the years, but many people are not in a union. They may not be familiar with unions. So what is Unifor? Can you tell us a bit about the union and your role as president?
Oh, the union is everything, Peggy. A union is, of course, a tool for workers to better their lives and better the world around them. And Unifor is Canada's largest private sector union. We have 320,000 members in pretty much every sector of the economy, so 25 plus sectors of the economy. And it's really interesting because we're probably the most diverse industrial union there is in Canada, in that we get to bring workers together from all different walks of life to be able to form this powerful, influential, progressive union that we've been building for a long time now. And the last couple of years have been truly a great time to fight for workers.
Now, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre just did an interview with Jordan Peterson where he seemed to imply that Canada was inferior to the U.S. because they had a higher gross domestic product per worker. But let me ask you, do employers, if they automatically make more money, share it with workers?
No. Short answer, no. And that's a complete sentence, by the way. Of course not. We have to wrestle that wealth that gets created in society and make sure that it is actually shared with workers. And the most powerful tool that workers have to make that happen is collective bargaining and having a union. And obviously the United States, has had what I would say a downward pressure on unionization, and we've seen that over many decades. Canada's been more stable, and we've been able to, still as unions have an impact not just on what we can do for the people who are members of our union, But our collective bargaining impacts workers generally. I mean, what we did in grocery stores means that grocery store workers everywhere benefit from it. When we bargain stellar collective agreements in the auto industry, workers across the auto sector benefit from that. Honda workers and Toyota workers who are not unionized got pay raises because of what we did at a bargaining table. So unions have a much outsized impact on what they can do, which is why it's so important to have legislation and laws that support strong collective bargaining. And no nation in the world has achieved shared progress without strong collective bargaining, not one.
So it's really unions that force employers to share the wealth.
Yes, and hopefully good governments would do that too, and then collect that through, strong taxation and build a better society with the taxes and the redistribution methods that they can choose to do so, whether it's creating strong social programs or strong public services, which all Canadians can benefit from.
You're obviously passionate about making progress for working people and really for all Canadians. And I'm wondering if you could just tell us what drew you to the labor movement. What's your background?
Oh, goodness. Well, I grew up with in a union family. My dad was a member of the millwright local of the Carpenters Union. So from a very young age, I was aware of what unions did for working people and the benefit that they brought to families and certainly to my own family. But I started my working life out as a journalist, and I did cover labor issues at that time and a lot of politics too. And then the newspaper I was working for closed, so I got an offer of a job, a 6-month contract. Isn't that how all jobs start, it appeared, with Fish, Food and Allied Workers Union, which was an affiliate of the CAW. And that was way back in the 90s, just prior to the crisis in the fisheries when all of the fish stocks were closed down for commercial fishing. And it was actually Bob White that allowed this to happen. Bob White has a connection to many of us, as folks would know. Anyone familiar with unions, he was the leader of the CAW and president of the CAW, powerful leader, who went on then to lead the Canadian Labour Congress. But he supported the hiring of this young journalist and provided the financial support for it from the National Union. And for 6 months, it was just kind of supposed to be that, and that turned into 17 years of working with the people of mostly the fishing industry and workers who were going through perhaps the biggest crisis that they had faced in their working lives in terms of 20,000 people being put out of work overnight when the fisheries were closed. And that meant the union was fighting for its survival. It also meant that they were fighting for the survival of working people in rural communities. And so it really took on a much different tone, and it's not unlike then the economic crisis that we would have seen in 2008, 2009, where we just saw plant closure after plant closure. And how do you push back against that kind of global crisis, but at the same time make sure that unions remain strong through those kinds of periods?
You're from Newfoundland, and you really had trial by fire going through this collapse of the fishery crisis. Can you tell us a bit about how that shaped you politically, socially, coming from Newfoundland and living through that period?
Yeah, it really was, I think, a test of how important unions are. It was the union that was the driving force of keeping people together through that crisis moment. It was the union that fought for things like compensation and making sure that people had a place in the fishery of the future. And it was the union that really was the voice of what was happening through that crisis. And there was a real understanding that solutions could not just be achieved at that time through a bargaining table. You had to have political solutions to what were very big, consequential problems. And I learned very quickly that these two things go hand in hand. Collective bargaining, the work of the union, the bread and butter work of the union goes hand in hand with political bargaining, with making sure that the politics of the country and of your province are addressing the issues of working people and of the time. And And you can't, I remember early on I got this great piece of advice from Richard Cashin, who was the president of FFAW in the early days when I worked there. He said, in days like this, you have to remember never to get sidetracked by rabbits. We have a very big problem here, and we must stay focused on the big problem. And that's been a lesson that's carried me through my life, not unlike one you gave me, Peggy, many, many years ago, when we were talking about being sisters in this movement and some of the challenges that posed. And you said, you really need to know when to have your elbows in and when to have your elbows out. And you might not always know, but that is a very good lesson for all of us to take. Mostly my elbows are out a lot these days.
We notice it makes a big difference. Yeah. So you went on, you worked for the FFAW for many years, then you went on to become the president of the Newfoundland and Labrador Federation of Labor.
I loved that work, by the way.
So tell us a bit about that.
Well, it was interesting because working directly with the union, you're working with members every single day, and then you're basically now, as president of the Federation of Labor, in what is a political role. And you're fighting for political change for workers, whether it's making sure that minimum wage is the way that it should be, making sure that we have strong health and safety legislation, making sure you're bringing unions together to see and fight the problems of the day. You do spend a lot of time mediating among unions, I would say, as well in that role, because we don't always see eye to eye. And but you really do see the kind of bigger picture that unions can play when they collectively come together. And I liked the political work. I liked being able to, use the skills that I guess learned through journalism and the lessons I learned throughout 17 years with FFAW to really put that to use in a bigger context. And it was great. I did it for 5 years before Unifor started, and I started down this whole new road.
I want to take you down that road now. You were acclaimed after Unifor was formed, and you became were elected area director for
regional director for Atlantic,
director,
yeah,
right. And then you were acclaimed as the National Secretary Treasurer for the union, the first woman to take that position. That was quite a momentous achievement that women celebrated at the time. So you were acclaimed to that position, and then you practically had to walk over hot coals to win the presidency of the union. And again, you are the first woman to be elected president. Can you tell us about the difference between those two campaigns, and why was the first easier and why was the second so bloody difficult?
Well, because there was an election, and when there's an election, it changes everything. I believe, perhaps I haven't reflected on this enough, but I think, definitely we were at a time in the union, particularly in our internal discussions, that, the women leaders were definitely saying, look, it's time. We have to have a woman in one of the top two spots here. There was a lot of, I would say, internal discussion about making this happen. We were to be this bold new union that, Unifor had a lot of not just aspirational goals. Our Constitution talked about, doing great things and, transparency, democracy, all of those things, but really changing the world as we knew it and being a force for working people in the country. Because you have to recall, prior to 2013, we were still feeling the after effects of the global economic crisis, the financial crisis of 2008, 2009. Workers lost a lot of power during that period. Their collective agreements took a lot of concessions. It was not a good time.
And it was after that downturn that there was the merger between the Canadian Auto Workers and the Chemical, Energy, and Paper Workers
Communications,
Union.
Energy, and Paper Workers Union.
And Unifor.
And we don't use merger because it wasn't a merger. It was the creation of a brand new union with a new constitution, with a new structure, with a new focus. And
So it wasn't the joining together of two organizations, it was the creation of something completely new.
yes.
And was it completely new?
Yes, because the world needed something new. Workers needed something bold and different, and because we were bringing two cultures together, that meant, particularly in the early days of the union, I saw my role as the regional director in the Atlantic at that time, and I did that for 6 years. It was really about getting in there, hands-on, working with our locals, assisting where I could on bargaining things, but it was about building the union. And you don't do that if you're not out there with members and you're not out there with locals and finding opportunities to bring people together so they know each other. We would have locals in the same community who did not know each other.
And you built your reputation as someone who did that. Not every director, as I understand it, was as successful, but you really stood out as someone who brought people together and helped people overcome differences, different cultures, different viewpoints to really work together in common cause.
Yeah, I think you can't make the union stronger if you're not doing that every day. None of this can be taken for granted. Solidarity between locals, solidarity between workers and among workers, this is not a guarantee. It is something you have to work at every single day through all of the means and resources of your union that you can. And I just felt that this was such a powerful time. And of course, our opposition, that being either governments or employers at any given point, they always give us an opportunity to build the union because they're always doing something stupid. That this is the truth of it. There's always going to be something that they do that gives us an ability to bring people together, to either build around or push back against or organize around. And in the very early days of Unifor, for me, it was an attack on healthcare workers in Nova Scotia, and that enabled us to really show what this new union was capable of and what was possible. And very early on, we had a massive rally in which we brought together people from all across the region to support our healthcare members in what was a government attack on them. And, they felt it. Aerospace workers, forestry workers, all of these folks coming out to support them, and instead of it just being healthcare workers supporting healthcare workers. So the power was immediate in terms of what this new union could be capable of. And we just kept doing it. We just kept building it every single day because you can't be complacent for one moment.
So you were building the union and really standing out in that success, the collective success of the members in Atlantic Canada. And there was pressure internally for a woman to be part of a leadership team. So the existing leadership decided, yes, it's time for a woman in one of the top 2 positions or top 3 positions, and Lana is the one. So you were acclaimed.
Yes, and it was always, I don't know, I keep coming up against these interesting times, but I was elected in August of 2019, and then of course, not many months later, we entered into a global pandemic, and Canada entered into what was already a pandemic in some parts of the world, and that I remember February of 2020 watching the news in Italy and other places where there was like complete lockdown, and my husband, who's a biologist, he said, we have to get ready for this in Canada. You have to get your union ready for this. And I'm like, I know, I've been, this was the conversation over our supper table. And on FaceTime, because he was in Newfoundland and I was in Toronto.
So you were getting used to Zoom calls and FaceTime.
Yes, of course, but we were already, a commuting family, so we were FaceTiming at dinner, and it was very scary, but also knowing, once you start reading about pandemics and looking at what was happening in the rest of the world, it very quickly became obvious that we had to get ourselves prepared here. And I think that forward thinking and having a structure within our union to bring that to, and people taking it seriously when I did bring it to them, and then starting an internal process of getting the union ready, and knowing that this was going to be a very difficult time. We did not know how big or for how long. but we had to prepare for the worst. We had to prepare the union's finances for the worst if we were into a situation where members were out of work for an extended period of time. And of course, we had tens of thousands of members who were laid off during that period, and some of them for a very long period of time if you consider sectors that did not recover for longer than 18 months, 2 years, hospitality sector and others. So that became trial by fire, I guess.
Trial by pandemic.
Yes, it was. But I took a lot of the lessons I learned during the cod moratorium and the fisheries closures, the kind of economic crisis, the kind of political response that you would need, the kind of structure and support that our members would need. I learned a lot during that crisis and applied it during the pandemic, and we had a great team because you cannot do this alone. We're a union for a reason. We work together, we solve problems collectively, we fight for workers collectively, and we had a task force from the very early days. We met daily during the pandemic, sometimes twice a day, on conference calls. All of the senior team, the assistants, people who did collective bargaining, anyone who had a senior role in the union, we brought them together every day, sometimes twice a day. That's how quickly things were evolving. And people's health and safety was at risk. So we had to make sure that we were doing everything we could to protect the health and safety of working people, our members and others. So we just went into high gear. And we did that for a very long period of time. But there were a lot of tough decisions that we had to make during that period too. The finances of the union were impacted, and we had to be strong for our members, and we had to make sure that governments were responding with support programs, not unlike we're going to need from them if we end up in a trade war. So it was a difficult time, but I think for us, we showed our members how relevant their union can be to them during all types of times, collective bargaining, but that kind of a global crisis, it's the union that will see you through.
So once again, you kind of had your mettle tested through a crisis and were able to demonstrate to the total union your ability to lead in difficult times. So tell us about the presidency. I mean, it was very public knowledge that there was an ethical breach in the union, and the existing president, ultimately stepped down from his position. But then there were three of you who decided to throw their hat in the ring for the presidency. Now, again, no woman had ever been elected president. In spite of the growing numbers of women in Unifor, still a majority of men.
Yes.
And so that was an uphill battle. Just tell us a bit about that. What made you successful?
Oh, goodness. The same thing that makes everybody successful, I think,
You got more votes.
Yeah, that was very helpful. But, it's hard work. It's the fact that I think, I had a reputation in the union. It was one that was respected. I believe you go at everything with the idea that you have to outwork what's going on around you. That's how you can't, I think I used the words earlier, you can't be complacent. That's true of everything you do. I have an urgency about things. I approach it that way. And I had a great team around me and people who believed that we could do amazing things in the union, and that we could inspire our locals to be empowered to do amazing things. And in the end, I campaigned hard with locals from one part of the country to the other, and was successful. I think what I would say about that period, it was difficult. But then afterwards, we had to very quickly move. The union had to come back together. We had a job to do. We had to fight for workers, and there was an opportunity and a moment to be able to achieve great things. And we couldn't do that if the union was divided. So I knew the first year there was no stopping, there was no sleeping. Our members had to feel that we were out there doing that work, and that, if there were areas where, we had division, my job was to bring that back together. That's what leaders have to do. Everybody had to feel part of the union, and because everybody is. And we say we're a union for everyone. That has to mean something. We changed a lot of things internally. We put in place an ethics task force. We did all of the things that we committed to do within kind of the 100 days of taking office, and then I did what I always do. I depend on having a team around me, because you can't do this work alone. A lot of really smart people here at Unifor, and believing that things are possible. Maybe sometimes they wish I wasn't telling members, let's fight back so much, because that brings a whole lot of stress to it, for sure. But that's been part of the success, too, of the last 2 years, and achieving incredible collective agreements and incredible change for working people, and knowing the moment we were in, because we had one.
Yeah, you have often said, you have talked about the moment and making the most of this moment. We're having a moment, you
yes.
have said. And so you, it seemed like almost immediately went into some major rounds of bargaining and led some key strikes. Tell us about the moment, what was important about that moment, and how you were able to seize that opportunity to make a difference for workers.
Yeah, it was almost like a perfect storm of factors. One, we were coming out of a pandemic where workers were angry, yes, felt taken advantage of, felt that their employers, which they had been, were doing really, really well. If you look at how profits were skyrocketing during that period, and then of course inflation, and I would say also the pandemic taught workers one thing: the world didn't work without them. They felt empowered in that moment, and then it was, what do we do with this empowerment that workers are feeling? And for me, it was like, let's go with it, because it may not be there forever, as much as I want them to feel empowered every single day. We know that there's a world around us out there that can change, the thinking of working people. Our job as a union is to try to make sure that we're always lifting people up and showing what's possible, and having a vision of the world that is different than what we have right now. So knowing you're having a moment and seizing it is one thing. And so that means coordinating yourself in the union to be able to make sure you can do that. And the first kind of two big rounds of bargaining that we had an opportunity to kind of, I would say, show that we meant business in this moment we were in, was grocery store bargaining and auto bargaining. And they were happening at the same time. And we had a coordinated strategy for the retail sector, for grocery stores, and we had a plan. We brought our leadership together with our locals and said, we're going to deliver. It's going to be a hard road. These are very difficult employers to deal with, but the union is committed to this, and we're going to throw every resource that we can, because retail workers and grocery store workers deserve better. And we had a strike for a few weeks against Metro, 3,700 people at 17 locations, and
won.
And we won. We shut down their distribution center in Toronto, and we won. And that propelled, I would say, our union and our locals to look at the moment we're in and say, okay, we could do something here too. It was inspiring workers in other sectors. And they were inspired by what our grocery store members were doing. They were courageous to do this, because these are tough jobs, and some of them are very precarious jobs. And they looked at their bosses and said, no, we deserve better, and we're going to fight for better.
I think the grocery store workers strike, the Metro strike, really captured public attention, because everyone sees these workers face to face.
Yeah, they know them by name.
They know them. They rely on them, as you said. They were
Yes.
there during the pandemic. And people did know that they had been badly treated.
Yeah,
when
and
they
on
took
the
away
other
the
hand, the
$2
grocery
away.
store barons are pulling in record profits, and people are being gouged on their grocery prices. So all of this was happening at the same time. So we knew as a union, we couldn't let this moment go by, Peggy. We just could not, because it was a perfect moment to be able to deliver something better.
Now, I want to get into the current moment, but before I do, I'd like you just to speak briefly about auto bargaining, because I'm told that when you were running for election, one of the arguments against you as the woman candidate was you didn't know how to bargain. And auto bargaining is seen as the kind of quintessential, the hardest of the hard bargaining, very male-dominated. And there you were on the front pages of the newspapers, arm in arm with this all-male bargaining committee, heading into bargaining, taking on the auto industry, and coming out with double-digit increases. Tell us about that.
Oh my, it was tremendously exciting. But what I would say is that, bargaining is never one person. Like, this is why we call it collective bargaining. It's actually a committee of people supported by staff and resources, and anyone who knows anything about auto bargaining knows that it's teams and teams and teams of people. And we have incredible rank and file leaders who do incredible work at that bargaining table. And I had an incredible assistant who had a ton of experience, and staff from every department of the union. So it's not just about one person going in there and laying, putting your fist down on the table and saying, we want this. That's not how it works. It is very sophisticated. Auto bargaining is very sophisticated, not unlike energy bargaining is in our union, which was the next kind of pattern bargaining that we went into after auto. So it takes a team. It's a massive effort. One of the things that I did, I think, that helped a lot, because I knew I would face the skepticism as sometimes women do, but anybody new really probably would have, is I toured all of our auto facilities before I went to bargaining. I went to every single plant. I spoke to our members. I spoke to our local leaders. I wanted to make sure that I was on the inside of what it is and seeing what it is that they do every single day. And I built relationships as much as I could in terms of speaking to the employers. I had tons of meetings with them before we went to bargaining, making sure I knew the players. I knew by the time we got to bargaining what made them tick, because this is part of bargaining, is knowing who's across the table from you. That's, I think, an important step, but it's also to understand that you have a team that you rely on when you get there, and don't undercut your team. Know the role you're playing, know the role they're playing. It takes all of us to get that kind of a monster agreement, and it was a monster agreement. And we had a lot of other forces at the time. We had the UAW bargaining in the U.S. We had everybody in the world commenting on this bargaining, even though maybe they knew very little about what was going on there.
Yeah, there was criticism that
it was all kinds of things happening.
One agreement was rejected, and
yeah.
But you responded in an interesting way. You said it's good. People want more. They deserve more.
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing is that there's not a science in many ways to this, and we were all going through, every union was going through a period of rising expectation of workers. And I think what people outside of a union don't understand is that, bargaining is led, yes, by the national union in terms of the staff that support, but these are local committees. These are rank and file folks coming from their workplaces, trying and working really hard to understand what it is going to be needed to make sure that we have a good collective agreement that they can get ratified when they go back. And they were all experiencing, as we all were, a brand new time. And I think what I saw in that moment is we just go with it. I mean, that's the thing. If we can achieve more, we will achieve more.
If people want more, let's get more.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's always an ebb and flow to these things, Peggy. That's the reality. The economic times influence a lot. We had a tightening labor market that helped us a lot in bargaining. There were events occurring generally in the economy that certainly played out there. But smart negotiators know how to take advantage of a moment, and we did that.
We talked about that moment. We're in a different moment now, a moment of tremendous political and economic insecurity, with the election of not just the election of a second term for Donald Trump, but his threat of 25% tariffs, his threat to annex Canada, and the political uncertainty in Canada with the Prime Minister resigning. We don't know yet what the leadership campaign will be like, and tremendous support for Pierre Poilievre, the Conservative leader. What will all this mean for Canadian workers? I think about the huge investments in electrification of the auto industry. Are these threatened? What will a 25% tariff mean? Do you think that's a real possibility? What is the take of the union in this different moment that we are in?
Yeah, so like any crisis, because that's what we have right now, we have a political crisis and we have a potential economic crisis that we'll be facing. You have to put a structure and a plan around that in the union, and we've been doing that for many weeks. I believe you have to take President-elect Trump at his word, because you don't make a threat if you can't follow through with it. And that's the moment we're in right now. The danger of threatening tariffs is almost as dangerous as the tariffs themselves, in that it creates chaos and instability, and capital doesn't like that. And we depend on capital from all parts of the world to invest in Canada. And do they stop investing in Canada as a result of this kind of instability? I do think that there is a bit of a game plan here by Trump. Anyone who thinks doesn't have a plan, I would say, needs to give their heads a shake.
He's got a lot of smart people around him.
He does. And they have things that they want. And some of it is to obviously bring investment back to the United States. He's made comments like, why do we buy lumber from Canada? We can produce our own lumber. Why do we buy cars from Canada? We can build our own cars. This is very problematic. And I have been for many weeks now calling on the political class in Canada, the business community, because I think they're not where they need to be either, quite frankly. That this has to be taken seriously, and we need a full-on plan for these tariffs. A hard-hitting retaliation plan, so tariffs of our own, or whatever that kind of retaliation would look like. It can take many forms, but certainly a trade war is unavoidable if we end up with a 25% tariff on every good that we export to the United States. We will not have a choice as a country, and that means there's going to be a lot of economic pain, and that means all governments need to come together with the business community, with labor, to have a coordinated strategy on how we deal with this. And we don't have that right now.
And is it possible with the political uncertainty federally?
I think it's possible. I think the premiers have done a very good job of doing what they can, because we know we're basically renegotiating a trade agreement right now, but it's more than that, because the more chaos there is, the more of a position, a strengthened position that Trump has. So we have to push back hard. I don't think a charm offensive is going to do the trick here. This is his second term. He has more power. He doesn't have to run again. Follow the money. His friends are Elon Musk and all of these folks. And yeah, it's dangerous times. So Canada needs to do a few things. They need to have a retaliatory plan. They also need to have a plan for Canadian workers and Canadian industries to make sure that they're supported through a trade war. And that means the employment insurance program that we have is not going to cut it. We're going to need to have a kind of a pandemic type response here in terms of like a CERB type of program and a string of programs actually that will be required to support workers. And we're going to have to support industries, particularly those who are going to feel the effects very early on of these serious tariffs. Can you imagine? We're hearing the President of the United States talking about annexing Canada. We have European leaders weighing into this debate now. This is like a whole new world order at the moment. And that means for Canada, we also have to think about how we can protect our own economy in ways that we can, which means strong industrial plans. It means building the things that we can here in Canada. It means using procurement dollars in Canada to build the things that we need to build, and stop thinking that we can order trains from some other part of the world. Build them here. Build it all here. Ships, planes, trains, all of it. Put people to work.
Is there a relationship with Mexico at all? I see President Sheinbaum has pushed back, promising retaliatory tariffs and using Trump-style rhetoric, saying it should be Mexican America.
Yeah, this is the moment we're going to get into now. And, at some point, I hope saner heads will prevail, and because this is all jockeying at the moment, and people will sit down and work things out. But the reality is we can't, and our union and we don't have the luxury of crossing our fingers and hoping nothing happens here. We have to go full on defending workers and defending their jobs. There is no choice.
I'm conscious of the time, but I just want to ask you one other question related to this. You speak for Unifor members and for Canadian workers. Politically, who is speaking for workers? Right now, many workers support the Conservatives. And in a time of uncertainty, it seems that the NDP has failed to capture the moment in representing workers. What needs to happen at a political level to push for that progressive political voice that can represent workers to be in their own best interest? Because Pierre Poilievre is very effective at articulating the problems. He just doesn't have solutions that make any sense for workers. And I'm not hearing a real alternative from the NDP right now.
Yeah, and I think, for all political leaders at the moment, they better change gear, because the problem is different now. You don't get to talk about the carbon tax in a moment where we're under this kind of threat from the U.S. Like, that is like here, and we're dealing with this very big, real threat. So every leader, political leader, is going to have to come to terms with the fact that the dialogue has changed, the problem has changed. Working people are going to be looking for a different response from political leaders right now. And if I could solve all that problem, I'd probably be Prime Minister, Peggy. but I'm not.
Let us know when that campaign starts.
Yes, but I would say that they all need to do some serious self-reflection. What we saw in Parliament before the holidays, just this constant bickering, a confidence vote here and there and everywhere, and as we were facing and are under perhaps the biggest economic threat we've seen in a very long time, and we're doing, our political leaders are doing that instead of coming together like adults should and work together and fill this vacuum that we have right now with strong leadership and a strong united front. That's what we need. Or Canada will not be in the place of strength that it needs to be, facing what we're facing. And I hear it from commentators out there, well, let's just go to an election. Well, how is that going to solve anything right now? We could be potentially facing the notice of these tariffs on day one. January 20th, we could have an executive order. And we're in the midst of elections in Canada. Who's holding down the fort while we're doing that? I think that, political leaders who think that they can rely on what they thought they knew, we're in a whole new place now. It's a whole new ballgame.
Speaking of unity, the previous leadership in Unifor took the union out of the Canadian Labour Congress, which is the umbrella organization for the labour movement. Does that prevent you from working with the broader labor movement? Or are you able, I see there are many more women elected at senior positions in the labor movement. Are you able to work together in spite of that structural break, as it were?
Yeah, and to be fair, I was part of that previous elected team in terms of the decision-making that occurred around the Canadian Labour Congress. But for me, I do what I always do. I work with people because I think we have to. You have to build solidarity in all the places that you can. I believe in central labor bodies. I've always believed in them, as tough as they are. But right now, I'm working unilaterally and in groups with other union leaders, and I will continue to do that. I talk to the president of the Canadian Labour Congress on a constant basis. And, we're going to do whatever we can to work together for workers. And whether that's in the CLC or out of the CLC, these are solutions that we will look at this year. But, I don't think that should hold us back from putting forward the kind of response that working people need from us. And I know what working people need from us right now, and that's very strong leadership, because these are going to be very difficult days ahead, and we're going to be there for workers.
It's amazing how quickly things change, and there may be some people listening to this who say, wow, I better get myself in a union. What would you advise them to do if they want to get that process going?
Oh my goodness, please call me. We have a great team of organizers who would love to talk to you. But honestly, it's the best path forward. It gives you a chance to change your working conditions, to have a say in the conditions of your work, and to have a say in how you can change the conditions of your work and then change the conditions of the world. Because really, if you can make work better, you can make the world better around you too. And organize around these fights. And we've been so successful. We've been strategic around the organizing that we've done. But it's been joyful to see what our organizing department has been doing, but it's been joyful to see the workers who are coming to our union. I mean, the first group of Walmart workers at a distribution center in Canada is now unionized with our union. The first group of Walmart drivers are organized with our union, and we have active campaigns in other Walmart workplaces across the country. This is a new age, and that moment that I spoke to coming out of the pandemic for bargaining was the same moment that applied to organizing workers. And I believe a lot of this is because unions did such a decent job throughout the pandemic of showing what it is you could do in a moment of crisis.
Well, this current and upcoming crisis may, in fact, create another opening for workers to see that with union protection, they have so much more power. So if workers want to contact Unifor, what's the best way to do that? How do they find you folks?
Oh my goodness, the internet. Isn't everybody on the internet?
So you can find out the organizers, and you folks are on social media everywhere, I assume.
All of us. I mean, we have our union accounts, but I probably shouldn't share this, but I will. I operate my own accounts, just so everybody knows. So
Lana Payne is on?
I'm on all of it: Facebook, Twitter, Blue Sky, Instagram. Yeah, you can find me in all those places.
Okay. This has been absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for your time, and best wishes to Unifor members and to all of us in Canada on the year ahead. It's going to be a real roller coaster.
Yeah, we have a country to protect here right now. It feels a lot like the 80s all over again.
We're up to it.
We're up to it. We are totally up to it.
Thank you, sister.
Thank you.
Well, that was Lana Payne, National President of Unifor, Canada's largest private sector union. This is Activists Make History. Thank you so much for listening. Activists Make History is a special podcast series from Perspectives, a Canadian journal of political economy and social democracy, a publication and production of the Broadbent Institute. This show could not have been made possible without the generous contribution of Unifor, Canada's largest private sector union. If you'd like to hear more from Activists Make History, share and subscribe to Perspectives Journal on all major podcast platforms, as well as Press Progress's Sources podcast that digs deeper into the news stories you won't find in the major papers. The Perspectives Journal podcast and Sources are proud members of the Harbinger Media Network, Canada's progressive podcast community. Once again, I'm Peggy Nash, your host for Activists Make History and proud member of the Broadbent Institute's Board of Directors. You can read my latest book, Women Winning Office, an activist guide to getting elected, from Between the Lines books.